You wrote a really great piece called Is Asia Possible? Two words mean so little these days, Asia and solidarity. What made you write this piece?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked me about it, Katie, because it's really, really meaningful to me. Why? Well, look, um, I believe, and I could be quite wrong, but I believe that the war in Ukraine is not really a war in Ukraine. This is not a war about Ukraine and Russia. Yes, it's about Crimea, and it's about the land bridge that will connect Lugansk to Crimea, and perhaps it's about the Nazis, and it's about various things. Okay, it's about all. That's why the Russians are there and so on. But I think the principal thing that's going on is something that gets very little discussion. In 2018, the United States government, and you don't need any analysis. When I was talking about Pakistan, there's a lot that you have to surmise because very little of it is put down on paper. One of the interesting things about the United States is that the government says these things openly and people just don't pay attention. So anyway, in 2018, the US government released its defense strategy. Well, now pay attention to these things. In 2002, right after 9/11, the Bush administration said that the focus of US power was the global war on terror. Let's go out there and let's destroy the terrorists. That was the Bush administration's strategy. In 2018, under Donald Trump, that strategy was changed. Jim Mattis was the defense secretary, and Mattis and Trump put a new strategy forward. They said that the war on terror is over. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but they said the war on terror is over. The new war is to basically prevent the emergence of what Mattis called near peer powers. Near peer. Now, who are the near peer powers? Russia and China. They must be prevented from standing up. Now, what's interesting is to prevent them from standing up, the United States has been doing a number of things. One is encircling Eurasia, bringing NATO into naval, kind of a naval axis around the Arctic Sea, from the Baltics, Arctic, all the way across into the South China Sea. NATO ships have been conducting what are known as freedom of navigation missions, going really close to the territorial line for Russia and then China. By the way, it's interesting that the US government conducts freedom of navigation missions. The freedom of navigation is a term of art from a United Nations treaty, the Laws of the Sea Treaty, which the US government is not a signatory to. So the US government, once again, is enforcing something which it has not signed on to, because I would like to see freedom of navigation conducted by, let's say, the Cuban Navy off the coast of Florida, to make sure that gangsters from Florida don't once again come to overthrow the Cuban government. Why not? But no, the US government is not a signatory, so you can't mess around with US territorial waters. But that has been happening. Then there's been a real contest on the islands around the South China Sea up to the Arctic, where countries like Guam, Solomon Islands, and so on have become a contest for US power against China and Russia. There have been really close calls in the Baltic Sea over the last couple of years. And then linked to this, the United States government withdrew in 2018 from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This is a huge destruction of the arms control architecture, and it was really threatening to Russia and China. So I, looking at all this, felt a sense of frustration that the old Pan-Asian dream, like the Bolivarian dream in South America that Chavez, evoked. Chavez came in 1999 and said, let's create a Bolivarian, continent. Let's create a continent that looks at our needs, doesn't just, facilitate what the United States wants. There's a Bolivarian dream in Latin America. There's a Pan-African dream that continues to exist. Kwame Nkrumah of Africa, created a Pan-African dream. Let's create a Pan-African agenda. Africa should not be subordinate to Europe or North America and so on. There's no Pan-Asian consciousness. That was killed off by Japanese imperialism in the 1930s and 40s, killed off um, the attempt to create, some sort of Pan-Asian understanding and so on. There were moments when it came back, but it's gone now. The conflicts between India and China, between Japan and Russia, Japan and China, these things are quite severe. So I wanted to come back and just reflect in almost a sorrowful way. I wanted to reflect on how hard it is to articulate a Pan-Asian dream. And so that's why I wrote, Is Asia Possible? I think it is possible. And in fact, I think that the United States has, by this pressure campaign against Russia and China, has created actually the material basis for a kind of Pan-Asianism to emerge. It's early days, but I think what I wanted to say is, let's start a dialogue, about Pan-Asianism. Let people in Japan and China and India, Pakistan, Central Asian countries, and so on, and Russia think about this. I'm not comfortable with the whole Asian landmass theory. If you dominate Asia, the so-called Mackinder hypothesis, I'm not comfortable with that. United States didn't dominate and the middle of Asia, and it dominates the world. That's, you can't take a 19th century theory and say it applies today. Today you don't need the center of Asia. You can dominate the world in different ways. So I don't like that as such. I think the contest really is over not allowing these countries from becoming peers. Mattis said it openly. Biden has never revoked that particular, defense strategy. So yeah, it's in a way out of a kind of hopefulness that I'm saying, is it possible in this time, because of these contradictions, for us to start, rather than looking inward and defensively, to look outward to some kind of Pan-Asianism, and something that perhaps also draws in Europe.
Yeah, and it's interesting how Russia has always been in this kind of like no man's land, where sometimes it's considered Asian, sometimes it's considered European. So where would that fall in this?
Look, these things are artificial.
Right.
I mean, some human decided to draw the line. I mean, it's like Turkey. Turkey, most of Turkey is in Asia. Only Istanbul really is in Europe. You know, the other side of the Bosphorus is Europe. That's basically Istanbul and Greater Istanbul. Even actually, that's not even true, Katie, because large parts of Istanbul are on the Asian side. You they call it the Asian side of Istanbul. Is Turkey European or Asian? Well, people say it's Asian. It's an Asian power wanting to get into the EU. I think that's also quite silly, because
Right.
technically it's in Europe and Asia. Um, Russia is a different question. Russia's main urban areas are in the European side. What is today St. Petersburg, Moscow, and so on. But its major landmass is in Asia, and increasingly, as a consequence of this pressure campaign against Russia, increasingly, Russia has turned from Berlin towards Beijing. And that turn by Russia, when the Russians decided that the Davos meeting, after this is actually goes back before the fall of the Soviet Union. Major international capitalists used to meet in Davos, Switzerland. They continued to meet there every year at the World Economic Forum. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union, all the Russian billionaires showed up there. Boris Yeltsin, they all wanted to integrate with Davos. Well, when that wasn't working, particularly after the world financial crisis, 2008, the Russians set up the St. Petersburg Forum as an alternative to Davos, and they meet there every year. Increasingly, St. Petersburg Forum is more and more an Asian forum. There are people from China, India, Vietnam, Japan, Russia, and so on. It doesn't look at all like Davos. Davos is basically US, Europeans, and so on. St. Petersburg, also Turks, I forgot, a lot of people from Turkey as well. It's got a completely different vibe, and the vibe is a kind of Asian business vibe. As I said, the Japanese are there in large numbers. Japan is a member of the G7. It's a very close ally of the United States. It basically, I know it's rude to say this, but at one level, Japan is like a military base of the US. You know, Okinawa Island, certainly a military base of the US. But Japan is one of the big investors in Russia's energy networks. And, 23 or so, miles off the coast of Hokkaido is Sakhalin Island, just north of Hokkaido. Sakhalin Island is the principal, new energy prospects for the Russians. Sakhalin 1 and 2, major investor in Sakhalin 1 and 2 is the Japanese Development Bank, which is a government bank. Here's Japan, major ally of the US, in the Quad, which is sometimes called the Asian NATO. That's India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. And yet it's a principal investor not in the US but in Russia. And so these contradictions, as I'm saying, you can see at St. Petersburg there's a new articulation of business interests. These are not socialists, okay? These are new articulation of business interests coalescing around the Asian continent, drawing in parts of Europe, particularly Germany.